My name is Leslie Kaiser. I'm a Cure Garden Coordinator, and I'll be serving as the moderator. Dolly Foster is our presenter this evening. She's a landscape horticulturalist from the Oak Lawn Park District, has been a master gardener for 20 years, and an Indiana accredited horticulturist for 18, and a certified arborist since 2008. For the past 20 years, Dolly has been presenting lectures on many gardening topics. She has been butterfly gardening for the very beginning of her gardening career. Her passion has led her to raising monarch and swallowtail butterflies for 14 years. Her garden at home has been a monarch way station since 2011, and she manages 4 more in the Oak Lawn Park District. Dolly also manages the Oak Lawn Community Garden. Dolly, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm just excited about sharing butterfly gardening with all of you, and I'm ready if you're ready.
Sounds good.
So we're going to talk about butterfly gardening today. The first thing I always ask, especially when I do this class face-to-face, is how could we help butterflies right now? What could we do next spring, next summer that we haven't done before in the past? And the first thing is that we can plant for butterflies in our own gardens. So that means planting nectar plants for the butterflies and planting host plants for the caterpillars. It's really important to connect those two parts of the life cycle, because being able to nurture both of them means that you're going to have more butterflies in your garden for longer periods of time over the summer. The next thing I think that's really important is to develop that garden into a habitat. Having a garden, having the plants is one thing, but being able to develop your garden into a habitat is a very special thing, and I'm going to go through some points about that tonight. And then start a garden in your community, whether it be on a church campus or school campus, in your neighborhood, helping out a neighborhood group or one of your neighbors to start a garden or a habitat, I think is a really important way to share how important conservation is. And doing things like this on the community level, the very, very local community level, is like micro conservation. And I think it's just as important as large conservation projects are, like regionally. So consider that. And then you can always take in a few caterpillars to raise for the summer. Now, like it said in my bio, I've been raising monarch butterflies for about 14 years, and it has been quite a roller coaster. Every year is completely different. I'm going to talk a little bit about raising butterflies during my presentation, but one thing I really want to stress to all of you is that if you do not feel comfortable about taking caterpillars in and raising them in your home, it's okay. You don't have to. And if you do feel like doing it, only take a few. Take 5 or less. Wait until those caterpillars grow, they pupate, and then they come out as a butterfly, they eclose as a butterfly, and then maybe take in a few more. Don't try and have 10s, 50s, 100s going all at one time. That takes a lot of experience. It takes a lot of dedication and many hours during the day. So I always like to throw that caveat in because, and there are a lot of people who are really uncomfortable about messing around with nature that way, and that's okay too. You guys have to make your decisions for your own garden on your own, for yourselves. Okay, let's talk about the life cycle of the butterfly. All butterfly life cycles, moth life cycles, are going to be very similar to the one that is on this slide. And the one on this slide is very particular to the monarch butterfly, being that it's a very, very fast life cycle. Their life cycle starts and ends with their butterfly hatching in about 21 days. It's a very, very fast life cycle because the monarch butterfly has to achieve 4 generations during the summer. Most other butterflies have 1 to 2 broods of butterflies or caterpillars a year, but the monarch has to get 4 in. And sometimes if the weather is good at the end of the season, they can achieve a fifth generation. It's rare, but it can happen. So all butterflies start out as an egg. You can see that in the top right-hand corner of your slide. And the egg on the top of the picture has a little black shadow on the top of it, and that is the caterpillar's head. So that egg is about to hatch. Below it is an egg that is just been laid, and pardon my cats if you guys hear them in the background. And then the inset picture is a penny with the letter D on it because it was minted in Denver next to an egg. The eggs are very, very tiny. So if you do go out and look for eggs in your garden, be prepared that they're very small. But once you start to learn what they look like, the time of day that you should look, if you see a butterfly laying eggs, you can kind of follow her around. They get comfortable with people. It's a very strange thing. But if they get the hint that you are hanging around with them out there while they're laying eggs, they will stay and they will show you where their eggs are and they will let you take their eggs. It's happened to me a few times. It's a really curious thing. Below that are two little caterpillars that are about 1 day old. And that is a piece of long grain white rice next to those two little caterpillars. So the egg is very tiny, but the brand new caterpillars are equally as tiny. And then for the next 14 to 17 days, these caterpillars are going to be eating. They only eat milkweed. Monarchs only eat milkweed. There's many types of milkweed that they will eat, but it is only milkweed. And they are going to eat, and they will molt 4 times during their time as a caterpillar. They're in the larval stage. And they do this because the skin of the caterpillar can only grow and stretch so far. And then after, once it gets to a certain point, the caterpillar has to molt its skin to reveal a new skin so it can continue to grow. So it's a little bit different than mammals. And then at the end of this whole process, as a larva, as a caterpillar, the caterpillar will find a place to settle itself. It will hang from the bottom of a leaf, a branch, the bottom of a rim of a flower pot. And what they're doing is they are trying to find a place to attach themselves very securely so that they can make their chrysalis. And for example, at my brother's house, he has his milkweed in front of his front window, but the caterpillars on a very regular basis climb up the side of his house to the windowsill of his second floor window, and that's where they make their chrysalids. And we saw about 15 about 2 years ago. There was a whole bunch of them all summer long. And so it's kind of fun to watch them out in the garden to be able to make their chrysalis. They will walk away from the milkweed and they will walk pretty far. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to find somewhere to make their chrysalis without any predators around. They're trying to hide themselves from the predators. The most important thing to remember about butterflies is that they do not spin a cocoon. A butterfly will reveal a chrysalis. And what that picture is down in the center on the bottom of the slide is a caterpillar that has attached itself to the inside of my caterpillar house and has started to wiggle really vigorously, and its skin has split and the skin is starting to gather up at the top where the caterpillar is attached. And that is when it reveals its chrysalis. And then the chrysalis hardens. It looks really weird in that picture. It doesn't look like a monarch chrysalis, but if you look in the next picture, the green chrysalis in there is a brand new chrysalis that has hardened. It takes about 5 to 8 hours for it to harden properly. It shrinks up a little bit. And then in that photo, the black chrysalis is not black, it's actually clear. And you can kind of see the monarch butterfly wings through the side of the chrysalis. So this chrysalis is going to hatch imminently within a few hours. It's a really interesting process to watch. So I encourage you to either raise a few caterpillars to see this process, show your children, show your grandchildren how this whole process works. It's a great biology lesson, science lesson for kids, but it's also a really beautiful thing to observe. And if you don't want to do that, there are videos that many, many people have put on YouTube about how the chrysalis gets formed, how the butterfly comes out of the chrysalis. It's really interesting. A lot of people have taken a lot of time to do that. In the next picture, the butterfly is coming out of the chrysalis. We do not call this hatching. The caterpillar hatches out of an egg, but the butterfly ecloses out of a chrysalis. So eclose, brand new word for you. And then above that, what the butterfly has to do almost immediately is attach itself upside down to the bottom of a leaf, or again to the bottom of a chair, something outside or inside the caterpillar house, like in this photo. And that butterfly has to be able to pump all the fluid that was in its abdomen down into its wings. It has to have enough clearance for its wings to elongate, straighten out, and harden properly so the butterfly can fly. If there's anything obstructing the wings as they are hardening, then that butterfly's wing is going to be bent, and unfortunately that butterfly won't be able to fly properly, so then they can't mate and they can't eat. So it's really important, if you do decide to do this indoors, that you have the proper equipment, and I can help you with that. Every summer I coach a number of people who are interested in raising monarchs, so if you're interested in this, this is something that you should try and get a hold of me, and we can set it up over the winter. Okay, next we're going to talk about their annual life cycle. And this chart is the annual life cycle for the Chicagoland area, Northwest Indiana area, kind of all along that 49 north latitude. So right now we're at the end of September, and you can see that the color change on the bar is going from green, which is the breeding season, into the migration season, which is pink. And as they migrate, there is a very, very small percentage of butterflies that are going to mate on the way down to Mexico, which is where all of these butterflies are destined to go to be dormant, to hang out for the whole winter. They go down to Mexico, to the state of Michoacan, and there are these really beautiful tall oyamel fir forests on the mountains down there, and they just gather in the trees and they gather all together. I'm going to show you a photo in a minute. What they're doing there is just hanging out. They don't eat. Takes them about 2 months to go from the Chicagoland area to Mexico. So they arrive somewhere around the end of October. So if they start out in mid-August, they're going to get there about the end of October, mid-November. That's around the Halloween time. And then towards January and February, they're very dormant. They're not really doing anything. They're not even eating. These butterflies, on their flight down to Mexico, have to put on 50% of their weight as they are migrating. So they're not just migrating, they are feeding the entire way down to Mexico. So there are some important plants that are crucial for the monarch butterfly during their migration, and we'll talk about that a little later too. Towards the end of February, when the days are getting longer, the days are warming up, the evening temperatures are warming up on the mountains down there, then the butterflies start to break up the colonies, they start to mate, they start feeding on wildflowers that are down there in the mountains, and then they will start migrating. After they mate, the females will head towards Texas, and some of the males, but not all the males, make it out of Mexico, but some do. But they will head out towards towards Texas, and that is where the first generation of butterflies are laid. So that is where that's where generation 1 is. Those caterpillars are laid there, and then they will move on to the next leg, and I'm going to show you that on a map. So you can see on this map, the green arrows are the spring migration up and out of Mexico. They come up to Texas. That's where generation 1 starts. And then they will make the next leg up to Kansas and lower Missouri. That is where generation 2 is born. And generation 3 is born up in the Corn Belt and up in the Chicagoland region, all the way up into the Dakotas and northern Minnesota. And then generation 4 is also born in our area, but also is born north of us into Canada. There is Point Pelee is the northernmost sited region where they have seen monarchs. So that's 4 generations up. They are going to populate the whole United States with butterflies, theoretically. It's been hard the past 20 years. Their population has dived about 90%, but they're still hanging on. And there's a lot of conservation out there, a lot of programs, a lot of projects that are going on that are helping the monarch butterfly conservation. And that's why I do this kind of education, because I think that we can do that micro conservation right in our backyard, in our neighbors' backyards, at our schools, at parks, you know, anywhere locally helps the butterflies. When the end of fall comes, we'll go back to this. Once we get around to August and September, breeding stops. And after breeding stops, that means the whole population of butterflies that are alive at that point during that mid-August to late September time, that one generation of butterflies is going to fly to Mexico. They are going to be dormant over the winter in Mexico. And they will live longer than any of the summer butterflies. So they live about 6 to 7 months, sometimes a little bit longer. Occasionally, when we are monitoring tagged butterflies through Monarch Watch, occasionally a tagged butterfly will make it back up to the corn belt, but it's very rare, but it does happen. And those butterflies are usually really tattered looking. Moving on. This is a couple of photographs that I took when I was in Mexico in 2019 at the end of February. We were very lucky when we went. The weather was warm, it was dry. There was tons of wildflowers all over the mountains, all over the little towns that we were in. And so there were monarch butterflies everywhere. We would see them on the side of the road. They were not all bound up in the clusters because it was so warm. In fact, the clusters of the butterflies, because it was so warm, they had moved down the mountain to this area where we took these photos. So we didn't even have to hike as far. We only had to hike halfway up the mountain instead of the whole way up near the peak. Well, it's not really a peak because it's kind of a round mountain, not a peaked mountain. But the interesting thing about watching all of these butterflies, you can see in the photo that everywhere where you see a dark, dense cluster, that's thousands of butterflies or hundreds of butterflies that are gathered together. They're hanging on top of each other. They're hanging on the branches. Sometimes on the trunks of the trees, there'll be 3 to 5 butterflies deep just to keep warm when it's a very cold winter. But here you can see they're kind of spread out. And one advantage that I had that day that we were at this sanctuary was I had had knee surgery the year before. And so I wasn't quite up to hiking peak, you know, I couldn't make it with the rest of the group. So I kind of hung back and I sat for about 45 minutes on a bench and was just observing the trees. And every time sunshine would hit one of those clusters, the cluster would warm up really rapidly and the cluster would just break apart and the butterflies would just float away from the tree branch. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. And then when we got back to the bus, I asked everybody if they had seen it and no one else had seen it. And they said, oh, well, I guess that's because you guys weren't sitting there nursing a sore knee. You were hiking and I was not hiking. So if you ever have a chance to go down to see the Mexico sanctuaries, I encourage you to do it. And I encourage you to do it on a tour. Tour was very nice to have. All the transportation taken care of, safety, all that. It was very nice. But it was an incredible experience and I would love to go do it again. So why is the Midwest so important for the monarch butterfly? People do often say this. They say this in articles and studies and things like that. Well, the reason why the Midwest is so important is because historically, the Midwest is where almost 90% of all the milkweed was during the era when we had the prairies stretching across all of that area of the United States. Milkweed is found in almost every part of North America and down to Central America. And there's lots of different types of milkweed, and each one has a different kind of ecosystem that it likes to live in. And so that's why it has been able to spread across the whole continent, because it was able to adapt to all these different kinds of areas and growing habitats that we have all over the U.S. We have so much biodiversity in the U.S. along the, and especially in the Midwest. So 38% of all the butterflies that are born still come from the Midwest, still come from that Corn Belt area. Our area up near Chicago is very important. I do find that when I'm seeing people reporting about monarchs, just anecdotally on Facebook, on the monarch pages that I belong to, a lot of people talk about how northern Minnesota is really important for monarchs, and that's just kind of consistently every year. I don't hear very much from people from the Dakotas, but apparently there are butterflies that are in the Dakotas. Now that arrow that goes from the Northwest region, it says 12% and it swings down into Mexico. that appears to swing down over the Rocky Mountains. And I do not know, I have never heard of anybody actually seeing monarch butterflies up in the Rocky Mountains. I'm sure it's not completely unheard of. My sister lives in Colorado. She has never seen a monarch butterfly since she moved to Colorado. So it's kind of rare out there because I don't think they really have a native milkweed to Colorado, but I could be wrong about that. So allegedly, they don't have one. So there is a big difference between the summer and migration butterflies. And in this is a photo I took a few years ago. On the left-hand side is a summer butterfly. So this butterfly was either generation 3 or generation 4, most likely generation 4 or 3. 3 and 4, they muddle together. That's all I can say, is that they're almost born at the same time, because these two butterflies eclosed in my butterfly house or caterpillar house on the same day. And the one on the right is a migratory butterfly and the one on the left is not. That one could go on to mate and produce the 5th generation. Or that butterfly on the left could have left and started the migration and made it on the way down. There's a number of butterflies that are killed during the migration. And I think the reason why we have this small population of butterflies mating on the way down to Mexico, and especially in Texas, at the end of October, they see a lot of caterpillars. I think that's to replace the ones that are lost during the migration. I myself have not studied that, but that's sort of what I hear and what I've observed. The monarch population has gone up and down over the past 20 years. Monarch Watch is the organization that reports this with the help of the World Wildlife Foundation and the Mexican federal government. They go down in late December, early January, and they will go up on the mountain and they will actually monitor and document where the population is. There are a total of 11 sites where there are monarch butterflies, but only 3 are open to the public, where you can actually hike up into the sanctuaries and see the butterflies. And while we were there in Mexico, there was a whole nother set of small mountains and a volcano that was hundreds of miles west of us, I believe it was, west or south of us, where we were in Michoacan, and that was the 11th site. They found a population of monarchs that were dormant, and they were hibernating on the side of this volcano, and they had never seen this group before. So it was a brand new group. Most likely it had been there for decades every winter, but no one had ever noticed it. So, but referring to this map, you can see that there has been a lot of years that have had their ups and downs. The highest number was in 1996 to 1997. That was the year before Roundup Ready corn was released onto the market and used in very high regular numbers. And after that, Roundup was being used so regularly in farm fields and around farm fields that the milkweed that would normally grow in between the rows of corn and around the outside of the fields of corn was killed. And the same thing with the soybeans. So that has been really detrimental to that corn belt Midwest area of milkweed, which is why one of the conservation projects is to try and get farmers to just give up 1 acre and plant meadowland in that 1 acre, and to plant milkweed in that meadowland, make sure that that is part of the seed mix. And I've seen somewhere, and I wish I could find it again, but I saw somewhere, someone had estimated that if every farmer in the Midwest and the upper Midwest and the Southeast gave up 1 acre and planted milkweed on that 1 acre, we would probably be in a pretty good place. In Illinois, we need to concentrate, where I work in Illinois, we need to concentrate on getting, I think it is 3 billion stems of milkweed. I think that's regionally though. I think that's actually across 6 states, where we need to get about 3 billion stems of milkweed in the ground by 2030. And if we did that, we probably would be able to save this species. In reality, the species is probably not going to completely disappear. The monarch butterfly appears on several other continents. They are in Central America. They're in New Zealand. They're in Australia. They are in, where else? Samoa. They are in Puerto Rico, and they're in Hawaii. So they won't disappear completely. But what the problem is that we will lose the migration. We will lose this completely and utterly unique insect migration that spans 3 nations on our continent. And it's a very, very special thing. It's very unique. Other insects migrate, but none migrate in the numbers as the monarchs. So you can see that the year that I was down in Mexico, if you look at the chart, 2018, 2019, the monarch population occupied 6.5 hectares. That was 144% increase from the year before, but then we had a 53% decrease to this year. And most of that was due to weather during the migration last fall. So we're hoping that the relatively nice calm weather that we've been having over most of the United States, we're hoping that this is going to help the population this year have fewer deaths during the migration. Okay, how do these guys grow? It's pretty incredible that they can go from an egg, which is the white spot almost in the center of your screen at the top. That is the egg. And they can grow 1,000 times their weight and size in 2 weeks before they pupate into the chrysalis. And so you see that the caterpillar in the very center of your slide is the first instar. Second instar is way over on the right-hand side, and then the third instar is right in the center there, kind of that medium-sized caterpillar. And then the 2 larger ones are the 4th and 5th instar caterpillars. And they are very large. It's like a 3.5-inch long caterpillar when they are full grown. They're a lovely caterpillar to work with if you're raising them. There's no poisonous spines or anything on them. They don't do things that other caterpillars do to do anything defensive. They're a pretty cool ambassador for the insect world. If you guys have any questions about the life cycle, start thinking about them right now, because we're going to take a break for questions right now.
We have one question from Carolyn. She wants to know what other insects may destroy the eggs.
Very good question, Carolyn. There are lots of different kinds of insects that will eat the monarch in the egg stage, and most of them are stink bug larvae or stink bug nymphs and spiders of all sizes. If a hoverfly larva or a green lacewing larva come across an egg, they will probably eat it. However, they're more interested in aphids that are on your milkweed, because if you plant milkweed, you're going to have aphids. That is just a fact of life. So yeah, there's several insects that will eat it in the egg stage. Ants will also take the eggs. In the caterpillar stage, there's lots of insects that will eat them. Again, the stink bug nymphs, swamp milkweed beetle nymphs. And then in the butterfly stage, you have to watch out for praying mantids. And the large green praying mantids that we have here in our area are not native to our area. And they're the only insect that is fast enough to catch a monarch butterfly or a tiger swallowtail or polyphemus moth, our big, large butterflies and moths. They're the only one who can catch it. So because they're not native, I don't allow praying mantids in my gardens. I just kind of relocate them, and they can go eat somebody else's insects. I don't want them to eat mine. So yeah, they're vulnerable in every life stage. So let's go over creating a butterfly garden. It's actually very simple. The most important thing is to have a sunny space for your garden. 6 hours or more of sun is considered full sun. You need shelter from the wind, so having your butterfly garden have a tree or a few shrubs or a couple of big vines is really important, because the butterflies need somewhere to go to be able to stay dry during a rainstorm. In between 2 houses is really a good place for a butterfly garden if you have enough sun. That's where this photo is from. It's from in between my house and my neighbor's house. This was one of my very first butterfly gardens that I ever planted, which has now been relocated. It's kind of not a butterfly garden anymore for reasons. The third step to growing a butterfly garden is growing the host plants for the caterpillars and adding the nectar plants for the adult butterflies. So, and these two steps are interchangeable. You can have a butterfly garden with no host plants for the caterpillars. However, the butterflies will only come in and they'll nectar a little bit and then they will move on, because the thing that they are looking for is a host plant to lay their eggs on. So if you want swallowtails, you should have things, you know, parsley and dill, anything in that plant family. And for monarchs, you should have some kind of milkweed. And the flowers on those plants are also very important nectar plants. The photo in on this slide is of swamp milkweed. And that's, of course, a tiger swallowtail nectaring off of it. So milkweeds are not just important for the caterpillars and the monarch, they're really important nectar sources also. Huddling is an important thing for the male butterflies. This is how they can gain the nutrients, the minerals, and the salts that they need to make themselves healthy enough to reproduce. And so you can simply make a small area, 3 by 3 foot area in your garden, just kind of not really swampy, just kind of muddy. And you can add, if you have horse manure available to you, you can add just, you know, like a couple of cups of that every year is enough. Because if you see them out in nature on a farm, you will see butterflies going to cow manure and horse manure because it has a lot of nutrients in it. If you are near a stream bed and there happens to be a dead fish on the side of a stream or a river, you will occasionally see butterflies there sipping up the nutrients from the dead fish, because that will help them. You can reproduce this in your garden by simply having a little muddy spot in your garden. You have to make sure to maintain the moisture at all times though. And you should never have enough moisture in there that you could possibly have anything called a pond or anything that would host mosquito larvae. It should look just like this photo, just moist, sandy, a little dirty, maybe a few little semi-aquatic plants in there to hold the soil together, but that's about it. But you can also make this on your own, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The last step for a butterfly garden, and I think is the most important, is pesticides. If you're still using pesticides in your garden, now is the time for you to really ask yourself why you're doing it. Out of all the insects in the world, only 5% of insects are basically crop killers, what we call crop killers. And they are economically damaging to crops. We don't have very many of those in our gardens. And so you kind of have to evaluate what insect is in your garden that is doing damage, how many of them are in your garden doing the damage. Can you just simply pick them off and throw them into a bucket of soapy water if you don't want them there, instead of spraying a pesticide? Because if you use pesticides in your garden, you will chase off all of the pollinators, and the pollinators are more important than the few Japanese beetles you might have, if you only have a few, you know, and other things. So you really need to think about that, evaluate it over the winter, look at what you have out in your garage. What have you used this year? What don't you use anymore? By avoiding pesticides and adding plants into your garden that are going to attract lots of pollinators and lots of different kinds of pollinators, you will have insects that will fight off and eat the bad insects that we perceive are bad, that we don't want. You can use the principles of IPM, that's integrated pest management. It's a really clever set of rules set out by the US government back in the 70s for farmers, but there are 5 tenets of it that we use in gardening, and I'm going to let you look those up yourself. If you have more questions about that, you can let me know and I can help you find the information. So making a habitat in your garden is the next step. And with this, we want to make sure that we have diversity in our gardens, make sure we have milkweed, make sure we have lots of pollinator plants that are blooming at different times of the year. I'd say that with my annuals, my garden is kind of blooming towards the end of May. June, it really ramps up, and it's still blooming now. And annuals, native plants are crucial for butterfly gardens, but annuals also are crucial. I will fight till my dying day for people to put annuals in their butterfly gardens and not just natives, because they're just as important. When you plant your butterfly plants, you can put them in containers as well as in the ground. This photo is actually from my garden from about 10 days ago. And I added, this year I added some annuals, some big annuals in my garden because I am replanting all of my natives for whatever reason. There's several reasons, but I had to almost replant my whole entire garden on this side of the house. So we've got sunflowers in there, lots of zinnias. There's Mexican sunflower in there, a little bit of tropical milkweed. But besides having some annuals in the ground, they're just kind of placeholders giving nectar until my native plants grow next year and really start to put out flowers. I also put lots of butterfly plants into containers at home. And this is also something that I do at work because putting a butterfly garden in a container at my job shows the public that you can make a butterfly very happy in a very, very small space. You do not have to have a wide, huge garden like I have to make butterflies happy and to attract them and get them to lay eggs and nectar and those kind of things. Bird feeding stations should either be put away for the summertime or at least moved away to a little bit different area in your garden, away from your pollinator garden. Bird baths also. Spray hot pavement on a hot day and you will see butterflies show up looking for those salts and minerals in the little cracks and crevices that accumulate water. You can place rocks in sunny areas for basking. Basking is what butterflies do first thing in the morning in order to warm their bodies up to about 82 degrees so that they can fly and feed. So if you have a few rocks in your garden and they are in a place where they're in the shade for the morning, it might be fun to move one or two of those into a sunnier spot for the morning and see in the next season or two if butterflies actually start using them. Don't be too tidy with your garden at the end of the summer, because if you clean everything up, you are undoubtedly throwing away native chrysalids like swallowtail butterflies. So keep some of your garden hang up and standing for the winter. A drinking station is this little thing down in the bottom of the right-hand corner of your slide that has fruit in it. There are lots of butterflies that like to drink fruit juice, rotten fruit, fermented fruit. If you've ever seen a drunk butterfly drinking from fermented fruit, it's really funny. It's very, very funny. And then you can make a puddling station on your own using a large flower pot tray, like over in the left-hand side, with a few rocks in it. Use play sand, like dirty play sand. Don't buy the cleanest sand you can buy. And for the love of God, do not go to the Indiana Dunes and grab a bucket of sand. And definitely don't tell a park ranger that I told you to do that either. Buy your sand, don't go steal from the dunes. They don't appreciate that. The next thing about habitat is to know your native butterflies and to provide their favorite plants. So for monarchs, common milkweed is probably one of their favorite plants, not only to lay their eggs on, but to nectar on. And if you have never smelled common milkweed flowers in the end of June into July, it is the most beautiful fragrance I have smelled on a flower in a long time. Definitely something you should experience. Make sure that you limit your wasp habitat. If you have yellow jacket nests, bald-faced hornet nests, try and control those. You can use a device like this one in this photo. It's called a wasp deterrent device. If you hang that up, yellow jackets will think you have bald-faced hornets already, and they will vacate and not make a nest. And they do work. I've used them for about 6 years. Let's talk about plants. I know we're running out of time, ladies. I'll do this as fast and comprehensive as I can. We've already talked about host and nectar plants. We're going to talk about some examples of those in a moment. The most important thing on this slide is that you realize that monarch butterflies have color preferences for their flowers. They love purple, yellow, pink, and white, and orange, and sort of in that order. They love purple coneflower, they love purple zinnias, they love purple butterfly bush, and the other plants that go right with it. Just to let you know, though, I have never seen a monarch butterfly nectar off of a black-eyed Susan. Never. Never. Bees, yes. Butterflies, almost never. So keep that in mind. And you don't see blue and you don't see red on this list of color preferences. And that is because blue and pale pink and white are bee colors. And then red and dark purple and magenta flowers are for hummingbirds. So if you add all those colors, you will have a lot of variety of pollinators. The must-have plant list is something that my guru years and years ago told me about because I was having trouble getting monarchs actually into my garden. So if you do things like add butterfly bush in, that's buddleia. If you simply deadhead your butterfly bush, you should have no problems with it reseeding. Also, the brand new cultivars that are out there are sterile. They shouldn't make any seeds. Purple coneflower is below it, that's echinacea. I can't say enough about the native. It is one of the most beautiful flowers that we have in the Midwest, in our prairies and in other ecosystems. And planting it in your own garden is so beneficial to the butterflies and the finches and the hummingbirds. There's all different kinds of creatures that like it. Lantana is a really beautiful annual that monarchs really enjoy if you plant it in the ground. If you put lantana in a hanging basket, you'll have hummingbirds at it. You won't have monarchs at it. It's a very weird distinction that I observed a few years ago. The orange daisy down in the bottom, that is Mexican sunflower. That looks a bit like a very small innocuous flower in this photo. In reality, Mexican sunflower can grow 5 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. It is a giant annual flower, and it is well worth giving up the space in your garden to have this plant because it blooms at the time of the migration, and the butterflies need this as a source of nectar for the migration. And zinnias above that are great. Whatever flowers you choose for your garden should kind of be looking like this zinnia, where it is open. I kind of describe it as an open-faced turkey sandwich rather than a closed turkey sandwich. You should have fewer petals than more petals. The more petals you have, the harder it is for your pollinators to get to the nectar. So an open semi-double or single-petaled flower is always better for pollinators than double. Up in the top right-hand corner is Verbena bonariensis. This is Brazilian verbena, a really beautiful annual. It reseeds itself regularly, but it's not a pest. It's very easy to move around and to limit or control if you need to. It grows about 4 feet tall. It's a fantastic plant. A few butterfly plants that are not natives. We have peonies up in the top left-hand corner. And yes, there are peonies that don't look like our state peony flower, that are like a big pom-pom. That peony is coral charm, and it's a really beautiful semi-double, and it's excellent for bees in the spring. We have Jupiter beard in the center. It's a really nice old-fashioned cottage plant, cottage garden plant. Phlox, any type of phlox, it doesn't matter. It can be a cultivar, it can be native, it can be tall, it can be short, it can be spring, it can be summer, it can be the annual phlox, it doesn't matter. Pollinators all love phlox. Down in the bottom left-hand corner is ageratum. This is not a native, this is an annual. And ageratum, when we think traditionally about ageratum, we think of it as being a small little bedding plant about 8 inches tall. This ageratum is called Blue Horizon, and it's absolutely beautiful. Pollinators love it. It is 2.5 feet tall. So nice and big, good for big containers, good in the ground. I use it at work. I've been using it at work for many years. In the middle, we have Nepeta, which is catmint, very popular with bees, but some butterflies do go to it. So it's a good pollinator plant. Catmint, calamint is a white version, cousin of this plant, also equally important for bees, especially tiny, tiny little native bees. And on the bottom left-hand corner is our basically one of the most staple flowers that we have in the Midwest for fall blooming, and that's autumn joy sedum, which is an important plant for the American lady and the painted lady migration because they're also a migratory butterfly. So this and New England aster are important for them. So if you see what I'm saying about diversity, the more diversity you have, the more different kinds of insects you will have, and that will create a small niche ecosystem in your own garden, which is very beneficial to a lot of species. Natives for butterflies, there are tons of natives for butterflies. I'm only going to focus on a couple here. I have a nice list on a handout for you when you get your information from Leslie and Amanda. Down in the bottom, left-hand corner, that is Joe Pyeweed. There's a lot of different kinds of Joe Pyeweed, different species and some cultivars. And in my experience, it really doesn't matter what kind of Joe Pye you have. It could be the 2-foot tall baby Joe, or it could be the spotted Joe Pyeweed species, which is 7 feet tall. It doesn't matter. Monarchs absolutely love Joe Pyeweed. In the center is Rattlesnake Master, which is a wonderful bee plant, especially for bumblebees. And it blooms in August and the beginning of September. It's a really gorgeous white flower, and the leaves sort of look like yucca leaves, but it's not a yucca plant. I know how people feel about yuccas. Monarda, this is a native Monarda in this picture. This is Fichulosa, but it really, with Monarda, it doesn't matter. You can have cultivated Monarda that's named cultivars, the different colors of raspberry and purple and lavender, or you can have the native Monardas. It does not matter because bees and butterflies love it all the same. They all have nectar for the different species. And then again, Echinacea. And I put Echinacea in here again so that you know that there are different species of native Echinacea. There's Pallida, there's Purpurea, and there's Paradoxa. And they can all grow in our region, and they're all worthwhile for the butterflies. Now, the natives on this slide are all natives that bloom towards the end of the season and are critical for the butterfly migration. And the migration is triggered by the length of day shortening, the temperatures overnight getting colder, a couple of other kind of meteorological reasons that are kind of vague. But the other most important thing about the migration is that the goldenrod up in the top left-hand corner and the New England aster down in the bottom left-hand corner are two plants that start blooming right around the same time as the day's shortening and the night's getting cool. And the monarch butterflies will follow that bloom line of these two plants all the way down to Texas. So it's very advantageous for us to plant these two plants in our gardens for the fall migration. They are probably just as important as milkweed, if not more important than milkweed. I want to stress to you that if you are trying to do conservation for monarchs and other butterflies, there are a lot of sources and a lot of places where people are going to say plant milkweed, plant milkweed, plant milkweed. And I do say plant milkweed a lot, but it is also extremely important to try and make a habitat out of your garden and to add things like these migratory plants that are important for them during that time of the year so that they can fatten up on their way to Mexico. That's why these plants are so important. They have very rich nectar that help the butterflies put weight on. This is just as important as having a caterpillar plant. So we have goldenrod on the top, New England aster on the bottom. In the center is a blazing star that, unless you're familiar with native plants, this blazing star will be new for you. This is blazing star ligulostylus, Liatris ligulostylus, meadow blazing star. It grows very tall, like 5 feet tall. It is the most amazing plant in September. And my plants that I have at work are covered with monarchs on every cool, sunny September day. It's really beautiful. Butterflies of all species love it, but it's especially important for the monarch migration. So that's 3 plants that are important for the migration during the migration. And then you add in that Mexican sunflower just sort of as supplemental nectar. Ironweed is the top right-hand corner. It blooms a little bit before the migration starts, but it is just as important as the other plants. And then cup plant is also kind of a late summer, pre-migration bloomer that is a good plant for the monarchs. Let's talk milkweed, and we might be running out of time after this. Tropical milkweed is, well, let me go back, reverse. There's 110 species of milkweed in North America. So like I said before, they cover all kinds of ecosystems all over North America, from Canada all the way to central Mexico. There's annual ones for our area and perennial. Tropical milkweed is a great perennial. It's super easy to grow. The monarch butterflies love the flowers. Hummingbirds love the flowers. And this is the plant that I get almost all of my eggs off of for the summer. However, I feed my caterpillars common milkweed, and they can switch between the two without too much trouble if you start early enough after they hatch out of their eggs. Common milkweed is great. It does take up a lot of space. You have to be prepared for that it's going to spread. I did show a photo earlier in the presentation where you saw a gigantic patch of it. There was about 60 stems of milkweed in that patch. It's one of the reasons why I have to do a little replanting, because it's kind of wandered a little bit out of bounds. But common milkweed is beautiful for its fragrance, just from the people aspect. It has a completely different texture than any other garden flower that we've ever had in gardens in the Midwest, other than just pure native gardens. But it does spread a lot. We do not say invasive about common milkweed because common milkweed is a native, but it can perform aggressively in how it moves through the garden. And my theory is that it moves through the garden so much, and through prairies and other gardens and other planting places where it's in one place one year, it's moved on to another place another year. I think it is a very nutrient hungry plant, and it is constantly moving, looking for fresh new pockets of nutrients. Above it is prairie milkweed, Asclepias sullivantii. It's not really readily on the market in garden centers, but you can buy it from native plant sales, native garden centers, and it's super easy to grow by seed. Prairie milkweed does not spread as fast or as much as common milkweed, and it's shorter. It's only about 2.5 feet tall. Common milkweed, the tallest I've ever had it in my garden where it was reaching for the sun, was about 6.5 to 7 feet tall, but typically it's only about 4 feet tall. Swamp milkweed in the center is Asclepias incarnata. It's called swamp milkweed. It's called rose milkweed. It can be called red milkweed. They're trying to get away from these names for milkweed that have sort of soured people's attitude about it. And people think of swamps and they don't like swamps, I guess. And so they're starting to move away from that name and calling milkweed, this milkweed, rose milkweed. But in any case, the name swamp milkweed shows us that this plant likes moisture. It can grow in standing water for part of the year. However, it's extremely adaptable. It does not have to be in standing water all year. It doesn't even have to be in moist soil all year. If it's in your garden and it's in a place where it's dry, when we have droughty periods of the summer, just make sure you supplement it and it'll stay very healthy. It's a good nectar plant. I get caterpillar eggs off of it very frequently, and it's great because it doesn't spread. It is just a clumper. You get a couple of new stems every year. It lives for about 5 to 6 years, and then it starts to decline, and then you get some new seedlings in the garden, and so it renews itself really easily. Butterfly weed, I think, is probably the gateway native plant for most people. I know it was for me. When I first bought it about 15 to 18 years ago, I had no idea that it was a native to the Midwest, to the prairie. I had no idea that it was even a milkweed. A lot of people don't know it's a milkweed, but the great thing about this plant is it doesn't get that many eggs and caterpillars. However, it is one of the most popular nectar plants in the garden when you plant it. And if you plant it in a place where it has good drainage, it's a happy plant, it has good drainage over the winter, it's kind of dryish, then it will live up to 10 to 12 years for you. It's very long-lived. So, start milkweed, plant milkweed, start a Monarch way station. If you already have a garden, look on monarchwatch.org, see if you qualify to register your garden as a way station. This is how Monarch Watch is raising money for their research efforts. Right now, we have about 29,800 Monarch way stations in the US and Mexico and Hawaii. Well, Hawaii has 11. Alaska doesn't have any because we don't have monarchs in Alaska. But the Monarch way stations originally were started as a way to track where milkweed was being planted all over the US. And what happened was, when in 2014 we had the Monarch be petitioned for the Endangered Species Act, the conservation and education world of the monarch butterfly exploded, and the Monarch way station numbers started going way up, and they actually are still growing. So if you have the opportunity to register a garden as a way station, I would encourage you to do it and be part of this citizen science project. But how do we get more milkweed? You have to get out there and you have to gather milkweed pods. They will be ready towards the end of September. to the first week of October before they totally split and the seeds start flying away. But I caution you, if you go out somewhere on a roadside or in a field or wherever you want to go grab milkweed seeds, don't take more than you need. Don't take more than 20% of what is there, because whatever the pods that are there are what that area can support. And we need some of that seed to actually be renewed in each site. So never take all of the pods from a site, just take a few or just take one. Or if you need milkweed seeds, I have plenty. I have milkweed seeds, so many milkweed seeds. So just let me know if you need milkweed seeds. We'll find a way to get it to you. I have probably 5 different species of milkweed, and I'm willing to share. Other organizations that will interest you for more information: Monarch Watch Bring Back the Monarchs, Pollinator Partnership, Journey North is where you will become a citizen scientist and record all of your sightings of butterflies, eggs, caterpillars, and milkweed and chrysalids. It's a very cool citizen scientist project to be a part of. I encourage you to get part of that. And Monarch Joint Venture probably has the most information in the way of publications that you can print off for yourself or save to your computer. And what else can you do? You can register your garden as a way station. You can certify your garden as a national wildlife refuge garden. Register your garden with Wild Ones, which is our Native Plant Society. The only Wild Ones chapter in all of the state of Indiana is in Hammond at Gibson Woods. And I've been a member for about 20 years. And it's a really cool club to be a part of. If you want more information, just Google Gibson Woods Wild Ones. Register with Monarch Joint Venture. You can register your garden there and get involved, volunteer, get out there and share what you know. Start growing natives. There's so many things that people can do, and every little part that you play in the micro conservation locally helps the bigger picture. Think of your garden as a lily pad in a very large pond, and the pond being the Midwest. And your garden is a jumping off point for Monarch to go to another garden, to end up in some sort of preserve or some sort of prairie. And so your gardens are just as important as the big preserves, because they are providing the food for the monarchs as they move from preservation to preservation. Okay? And have fun. Don't get stressed out. And let me know if you need seeds. Do you have any questions?
All right, it looks like we have a question from Stephanie. I had a chrysalis turn brown and then I found a hole in it. Was it due to parasites? And how do I keep parasites away?
That was definitely a parasite. And the best way to prevent parasites is to gather the eggs as soon as you see them. And the best way to do that is to kind of be a detective out there. Watch your monarchs. And if you see a monarch laying eggs, follow her around and take her eggs. But that's the best way, is to get them right when they're laid, within probably the first 24 hours. And that will prevent arachnid fly or there's another fly, and then there's another one, there's OE. There's about 5 different parasites that can get into a monarch egg or a caterpillar.
It looks like Stephanie has one more question. Do you recommend companion planting to keep bad bugs away, like marigolds?
I do. And doing that and following the companion planting guidelines for flowers, what that does is it has you planting annuals and other perennials and herbs that have tons of pollen in them that attract beneficial insects, where they eat the pollen, they will drink a little bit of nectar, but mostly what they are looking for is the larvae and the adults of pests that they're also going to eat. So that is marigolds and allowing a little bit of Queen Anne's lace, and there's like a dozen other plants I can't think of right now. But yes, companion planting can work. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming and joining me. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you learned at least one thing. When you get the information with my handouts and things in it from Amanda and Leslie, my email address is on there, and you can email me with any questions, or if you have a seed request, we can talk about it from there.